So at this time, I would like to go ahead and invite Judge O'Gara to the front. And briefly, Judge O'Gara is the presiding judge for the Tlingit and Haida Tribal Court, whom for the last 3 decades has worked primarily for or with Native communities and victims of crimes. She has been with her tribe, Tlingit and Haida, since 2007. And this is going to be Judge O'Gara's 3rd visit to the ABCP region, and so we're very thankful for her attendance and for her helping out in support of our tribes. Judge O'Gara is going to be presenting on courtroom safety, so if everyone would please help me in welcoming Judge O'Gara to the front.
I have a fan club here. I like it. Really, to approach this topic, I think what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the safety measures that we have put into place in my tribal court over the last 12 years. As briefly as I can, and then just ask you some questions. And really my goal for this presentation, which I don't think will take an hour unless, of course, you all have a lot of questions, which I hope you do. Primarily because safety really is unique to each of our own courts. So by just giving you a summary of what we've put into place in my court will help just stir some questions and some thoughts. And the thing to really remember is safety first for your judges and your court staff. Safety also for all of the tribal and non-tribal folks who come in to use your court. You want to make sure that they're safe. Whether your court is a circle or a court of elders or a judge sitting on a bench or what. And safety, you'll know, for those of you who maybe have gone to trainings, national trainings in particular outside of Alaska, court safety becomes really, really important. And you'll know that there's lots of violence you just have to read the news to know that violence happens not just at the schools, but also in the courts. And folks who are helping families to solve problems sometimes will find themselves under attack. And they're by folks who think that they've been done wrong. When we opened up my court in March of 2007, there was no safety measures whatsoever. They pointed at an empty house in the middle of a parking lot and said, "That's your courthouse." And we built it up from there. And really, there was times when we knew that folks were coming in that might be volatile, might have a temper, have a history of anger management, unable to manage their anger. And we just took precautions, made sure that we had extra people in the court, especially in the early days when it was just myself and a court clerk. We were the only 2 staff members. And we didn't want to necessarily be in a house, literally it was a house, that wasn't connected to any other buildings and had no other employees or staff are just calling 911. Which I know is not possible in many of your villages, but in Juneau it was, but then it still is going to take a long time. And so sometimes we would just predict, well, so-and-so is coming in for a hearing, maybe we better get Jason or somebody to come down and just sit in the court, and we would do that. And that was our safety plan. That was our safety measures in the early days. We've now moved into the main administration building, and we have locked doors, and we still do the background checks for everybody that's coming in. We still have the ability to look at court view and see if we have folks who have lots of violent criminal history in their background, or if they have a lot of domestic violence in their background. Then we'll make sure that we are keeping the 2 different parties coming into the courtroom at separate times and separating them as soon as they're in the courtroom. And again, just trying to keep the probability of confrontation, verbal or physical, down to a minimum by just rearranging our courtroom and trying to make everybody comfortable. And it really goes back to what Rick was saying and what Kevin has said in the past 2 workshops we want to ensure that everybody, including somebody who has a propensity to violence, that they have their due process rights protected, that they have an opportunity to actually be heard, which really, if they want to be in the court, they have a right to do that. We also offer, and have done this, offer to have them participate by phone. Now, if they really are opposed to that, we will make arrangements to have them come into the courtroom, but again, we'll make precautions. And we'll have folks, we'll have one party and all of their family members stay in the court and have the other side leave the courtroom first, and then wait until they're outside the building and let the other side of the case leave. So those are just some of the precautions that we have. Then about 4 years ago, we found the money and contracted for bailiff services. Now, our bailiff is a hired security guard. Very little training. It really is just a security guard that local in Juneau that really patrols the empty buildings sometimes and helps direct people the direction. So they're not very mean or very imposing. They're unarmed. But just having somebody who looks like a bailiff with a uniform and a cell phone to make any phone calls, and somebody who's trained in just diffusing the situation rather than escalating the situation, I think is important. So those are things that the court, oh, and did I already mention the locked door? We now have a locked door because we're on the main administration building. You have to check in with the receptionist and then actually be let into the court, so folks can't just walk into the court area, the place where we've got our clerks and our courtroom and the judges' offices. You can't just walk in. You have to check in with reception and then give your name, and then they call and say, so-and-so's here, and somebody will come out and get you. So if you want to come in, and whether it's for a court hearing or just to file papers. So some of those things. Now, by lower 48 standards, those provisions that we have put in place for our Juneau courthouse or courtroom would be sorely inadequate for the down south lower 48 court standards. We don't have a metal detector. Our bailiff does not have one of those metal wands. We don't have a metal detector even to get into our building. We do have a sign that says no weapons or firearms allowed in the court. And we have had once, as soon as we put up that sign, we had one person who actually was a homeless person who had a case, and he had a knife, which I don't blame him. He's living on the streets, and he needed to have some protection, and he actually said, I have a knife, and he gave it to the court clerk before he went into the court to be able to comply with the warning sign that said no knives or weapons in the courtroom. So the sign actually did work. It was kind of amazing that it worked. So if somebody had a gun and was really hell-bent on shooting up the courtroom, this would be the argument down south, there's really nothing in our safety measures to stop them from doing that. There's nothing really in our safety measures to stop somebody from really losing their cool and starting to argue, and we have had folks starting to yell. We've had folks storm out. Luckily, we haven't had any physical altercations. We haven't had any weapons that we know of that have been allowed into the courtroom. And my counterparts in the lower 48 think that we live pretty dangerously up here in the frontier. And I say, we just have to do the best that we can, and given the space that we have. And I'm going to venture to guess that many of you, as you're building up your court, are going to be in the same position that we in Juneau are, and sometimes even with less space, and maybe with borrowed space that's not even dedicated only for the court, but is serving a double purpose. That putting in those down south standard metal detectors and wands and locked doors and all of that is really not going to be practical. And is that what we really want? If you think, and this is, I think, really my message for most of the topics that's on this agenda and agendas in the past, is I can only say what we're doing at my court. And you all look at, put it on your list, and then talk amongst yourselves in your community and amongst your court staff and figure out what's going to be the best for your community and what's going to be best for your staff. And as long as you have a policy to do and to take all precautions to keep your staff and the participants who come in to use your court safe to the best of your ability, then you are doing more than I think we were probably doing the first couple of years that we were open for business, because we weren't doing anything except the two of us women who were staffing the court would call in the biggest male employee that we could find and said, just sit there. Just your presence will help keep somebody in line. And we luckily did not have any problem. I thought about telling you a horror story that I heard from a tribal court judge on her first day. Very first day, tribe had just opened up. And there was a shooting in her court, and this is down south. And the only reason why she survived is that she was conducting the hearing by phone. And I think 5 or 6 people lost their lives that day. It was a custody hearing, and one of the individuals who was a party to the case was hell-bent on making sure that nobody survived, including himself, and walked into the courtroom with a loaded gun, no metal detectors or anything, and shot everybody there. The judge, who is still alive today and still a tribal court judge, lived to tell that story, and the only reason she survived is she was on the phone. So, I can tell you my experience, I can tell you her experience. She has since taken a lot of precautions. After hearing her story, I certainly went back home and took some extra precautions to make our court safe. But we also had a discussion in my court about whether we wanted a metal detector or not. And we have gone through the court assessment, and for those of you who have gone through the court assessment that the BIA is funding, they spend probably a good fourth, 25% of their court assessment on safety issues. And so you'll get a list, if you haven't already, of safety measures that you could put in place in your court or in your soon-to-be developed court. Okay? But it's really up to you to figure out what precautions and measurements you want to put in. So, I think more practically speaking, and in less mechanics of safety, metal detector, wands, armed guard, signs that say no guns or weapons, all those you can do, but only if that's what you think you need in your community. Now, of course, we live in a state where in most of our villages, everybody owns guns of one sort or another, correct? And we all have guns in our houses. Somebody has them. They're accessible. So folks are out hunting. They're out trapping. There's knives. So there's weapons, but those are used for not necessarily perpetuating violence against other human beings. Those are used for subsistence and putting food on the table and in the freezer. What I've learned, rather than putting some of those down south standard safety measures into place, is to just be prepared and have the conversations with folks that are coming in. Make sure if you are hearing domestic violence cases that the woman who has been experienced violence in her home is about ready to face her using her, make sure that she's facing or sitting closest to the door so that if she wants to or needs to leave the courtroom quickly, that she knows where that exit is. So it's just communicating with her so she can leave. Whether he's doing anything or not, she actually might be just reenacting or remembering things that have happened to her by this person who is now sitting in the same courtroom. Let her leave. Give her an exit. Communicate with her what her exit is. And that's a safety plan for her. And having folks come and go in and out of enter the courtroom and exit the courtroom at different times so that they're not physically occupying the same space. Those are measurements. Doing a background check of sorts, and sometimes it's just court view, and just knowing that there might be a propensity, and making sure that the courtroom doors are open so that other staff members who might not be in the courtroom are alerted and have their ears open so that if there is raised voices or verbal confrontation beginning, that they're already alerted and can either come in and stand or can just open the doors. Before we had, well, it's actually still a policy, but when we have folks who are coming in and are a little irate with the court clerks, I've instructed them to just stand up, get out from behind their desk, and go over and open the door, the front door, and prop it open. Because outside is the reception area. And once somebody is starting to lose their temper, you actually diffuse their confrontational behavior by allowing for others to be watching them. You've by just opening the door, invited the opportunity for others to be observing and witness to what's happening, and that person who is quickly losing his temper or her temper and becoming verbally aggressive will start calming down a little bit just because they know others are watching, because you've just opened the door. So that's a mechanism. And then just not fighting. And this is called nonviolent communication, of just agreeing with everybody, with somebody who's escalating their communication to be pretty aggressive. Don't be aggressive back. Again, just diffuse them, okay? And you can train your staff and yourselves to use that model to help folks. And then we go back to, which is why I have actually argued against the metal detectors and the armed guard, because you get down to the basic human nature of why folks get angry at the courts. They may get angry at a lot of things. They might get angry at their spouse or their children or the neighbor who's cutting down trees that they don't want to have cut down, or they might be getting angry. But often, the court experience, they're getting angry because they don't think that they are being listened to or being given an opportunity to tell their side of the story. And whether the court decides on their side or not, they are actually most often calmed down by just being given the opportunity to tell their story. And so often I will, we're all human beings and we all know when somebody walks into a room, they are looking for a fight, right? They sit down and they're like looking around and they're just looking, all right, who's gonna get my angry words today? And they're just looking for who's gonna be the subject of their anger. And so you can see it. And I just address it head on. Okay, so-and-so, I'm gonna do some introductory remarks. I acknowledge that they are wanting to talk. I'm gonna do some introductory remarks. We're gonna get on the record. I'm gonna make sure that the recorder is functioning. I'm letting them know that whatever they say or do is gonna be recorded. And then I make sure that they have an opportunity to address the court, not the other person that they're angry at, but to the judge. So again, I'm still directing them, but then I give them an opportunity to be heard, and I let them know that I'm listening. I don't take notes, I actually look at them. I might even ask them questions because I want them to know that they are being given an opportunity to tell their story, however they want to do it, okay? In a calm voice. I don't let them just scream and yell and use profanity either, but that's what they want. They want to know that they've been heard, and that helps. And I'm not saying that's the only tool that you should use. I'm also not, I would be remiss to say that's the only thing you should do. You should do what is comfortable. You should talk with your judges and your staff, and it should be a decision that's made by everybody in agreement with what your safety precautions are going to be, and then go from there. So, who here has already had a court assessment report done? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And is there safety measures in your assessment? Yes? Any safety measures, any safety recommendations for how to make your court safer in your assessment? Anybody? I know there's only 4 of you, so then I sort of called you all out, huh? But I don't know your names well enough yet. So any other safety concerns? Has there been any incidences that, and I've just told you what we've done at Tlingit and Haida. We live in a town where you can actually call 911, and Juneau Police Department will show up. They're not that far away. Often they're just patrolling right in the area. So in our villages, we don't have that. In the villages in Southeast, we're not set up on the 911 system, and I know that's the case up here as well. So what are some of the other questions you all might have about safety measures that you can use that you want to share with each other? Anybody? We got right over here in the middle.
Speaking of safety, again, in our little villages, where we detain people that need to be detained in the cell or another.
Right.
Thank you.
So, and I'm at a little disadvantage from most of you as well. Juneau does not have VPSOs, so we don't even remotely have any tribal law enforcement whatsoever, though many of our Southeast communities do have VPSOs or TPOs, and in addition to MOUs with the city, you could also develop MOUs and where we contracted with a security agency, you could do an MOU with your local law enforcement, whether it's a VPSO or the city police, and actually see if they'd be willing to, for those cases where you thought there would be some confrontation or there's a probability of it, or even even just a slim likelihood, just ask the city police if they'll come and be present in the courtroom during that hearing as a precaution. It's certainly one option that you could add to your list of things. And we did, early in the day, before we had security / bailiff, there was a couple of cases where individuals had extensive domestic violence and history on court view that we could see, and we literally just we would alert Juneau Police Department and ask them to be in the area and available for certain hearings. We didn't invite them to come in, but I would look out the window before the hearing would start, and they'd actually be parked in our parking lot. So and we just met with them and talked with them and made that arrangement. So but that was more informal. But you could do MOUs with them, with your local law enforcement. The thing is do what you need to do to keep everybody